This is the state of the world. Catalytic conversations with leaders who are reinventing the web and building trusted technologies for the future of humanity. Brought to you by EXO, the Internet of Impact.
So welcome, Michael Zargham, Z. It's a great honor to have you here, and you've been a huge inspiration to me and a great leader in really advancing the state of blockchain technologies and how we understand they can be used in real-world applications and complex environments in the real world. And so it's a great pleasure to have you here. I think everybody knows you, but why don't you just introduce yourself, how you're kind of feeling today?
Sure. I'm Michael Zargham. People call me Z. I'm a founder in Web3 and sort of Web3 adjacent technologies. I founded a research firm called BlockScience, and I have a background in systems engineering, multi-agent coordination, sort of like large-scale information infrastructures, optimal resource allocation problems and such. Basically, that means I'm a huge math nerd. But I have a sort of long-standing sort of interest in and study of sort of system dynamics and environmental systems, et cetera. And I very much like the opportunity to bring those two things together. And that pretty much motivates my contributions to the space. So.
Wonderful. So, so you and I get to interact a fair bit, and we've done a lot of work together. We don't often have 15 minutes just to kind of talk out loud what we're thinking about. And so the first question is, what has got your attention about the state of the world right now? And this usually is a question about, like, what are we seeing? What are we becoming aware of that may be early signals that we can catch right now so that we can do something about them?
Sure. I mean, I'm going to take this on hopefully a positive framing, which is that I see a reclaiming of agency by individuals to have impact on the world around them. This is really an observation about the adoption of what the Web3 community calls DAOs, but I don't actually consider it to be a super novel form. If anything, I see it as sort of a re-decentralization or a reclaiming of sort of the capacity to act in small groups or small to medium groups towards shared purpose or shared ends. And I think that this is actually a pretty basic function to human organization. It provides a sort of fractal localness in purpose, and that it creates a much more diverse, much more resilient mode of response to crisis. So, if you look at large institutions' inability to adapt to things like climate change, you realize that some of that is structural. They're just almost feels like a big organization should be able to respond to a big problem, but they don't have the right sense-making apparatus or the right actuators. And in fact, the real activities that matter are, individual or really small group. And so, yeah, I would argue that the adoption of the idea or the ideals of small group coordination in pursuit of shared purpose is really rapid, and actually people just resonate with it. And there's a lot of details to be sorted out how to make this work practically and actually to accomplish those shared purposes, but it still has a lot of potential, and not in the this is brand new, we've never had this before, but arguably in a this is how humans and human coordination can actually work way of perceiving it.
Now, within that, there are some technologies that are enabling this, and there's some incredible innovations that you've been working on and that you are working on. So if you kind of deconstruct amongst the many different interests that you have and the many things you're working on, where do you think the real catalytic potential lies within the technologies? So you've spoken about the human organization and the dynamics of groups of people and so on. What are the technologies that are going to make a big difference?
So this is an interesting question. I'm going to phrase this in terms of technology, not just in a technical sense, but social technologies. For me, my work is tied together by the idea of the social institution of engineering, or engineering as the responsibility to, or stewardship over technology for human outcomes. And so when we do our relatively broad spectrum R&D, it covers all of the elements of what you might think of as a civil engineering process, all the way from, materials, which in our Web3 case means, smart contracts, sort of Web3 SDKs like the Cosmos SDK. It can mean Solidity development, content addressing like IPFS, and file storage and transportation, and like a lot of this we'll call it compute technology, but it's really just materials. And so if you take the materials, you start to organize them into systems, and you organize those systems in a way that they're interconnected with each other and achieve certain goals. Then you need monitoring and sort of data scientific apparatus to kind of keep track of what's happening and manage the differentiation between intent and outcome. Like, we did this to achieve that, we got something slightly different. So how do we observe that, acknowledge it, and steer, which kind of brings us around to governance and some of the organizational stuff that I talked about before. But I really view this as a big closed loop that accounts for understanding the evolution in the materials, the affordances of those materials, designing things to achieve goals, then like actually operating and maintaining those things. And that includes, again, the data science technologies. And I would argue that a lot of my work has been in the sense making, information processing, and the sort of monitoring and maintaining of digital infrastructures, with a focus on some of the data science side. I worked on a project, or helped design a project called CAD, which is Complex Adaptive Dynamics Computer Aided Design. We use it mostly for design validation for sort of signal processing or sense making apparatus, including some of the mechanisms that went into the alpha bonds. And sort of complementary to that is the ability to capture real data and funnel it into models, and to turn those kinds of analyses into basically awareness, because these systems are never going to be sort of perfect in the sense that they magically achieve our outcomes. So there's always this human feedback loop that says, okay, what did we expect to happen? What did happen? How are we going to be better next time? Or what changes do we need to make? And fortunately or unfortunately, even that has some baked in bias, or baked in sort of effects based on the apparatus or tools you use to collect that data. And so we've been working on something called CATs, which are content addressable transformations. Those are specifically kind of Web3 enabled big data transformers. We have some prototypes coming not too far in the future. But the gist of it is that we bundle up everything required for a big data transformation and use content addressing to sort of ensure the reproducibility of that, so that you can trust it even if someone else did it, or you can create provenance of data, or data supply chains. A lot of that work is still in the computer science kind of materials level, but we see it as filling an important role in sort of trusting data from like rich human processes, where you're going to collect data, and then you're going to have to take it through multiple transformations before it finds the form it needs to be in to get used by decision makers, both individuals making decisions as well as organizations making decisions.
So from your vantage point, do you see any evolutionary breakthroughs on the horizon, or that you're aware of happening already on the materials side of things?
That's a good question. I'm a very big fan of the plurality of the Web3 stack, and that's because the tools are all a little bit different, and that means they can fulfill different niches. And so my view is that basically diversity of materials is an engineer's dream, right? Like, if I want to design a thing, I want to go into the catalog and be able to see which attributes the different materials have. And I want to be able to pick the set of attributes and rely on the thing I'm using having those attributes, so I can organize it into a higher order system with some goals in mind, and not necessarily to be forced into, the optimal material that is everyone's using it. I'm like, well, like, is it the right material for all of their situations? Then if yes, great. But if I have some minor variations, then maybe I'd rather use this other material. Of course, these are deeply networked systems. So another important attribute of this is that these things are increasingly interoperable. So we see a lot of improvements in the presence of, bridges between network types. We see more interoperability between sort of the content addressing workflows and the blockchain workflows. You see more off-chain computation verification. You see more layer 2 equipment to sort of scale out the amount of computation that can be supported. You see, in the Cosmos ecosystem, the IBC, like this increase in interoperability, or like connective tissue, is probably the most compelling quote unquote material advancement, because I think it fits with the ontology of Web3, but it also fits with the ontology of, healthy institutions. This sort of, it's interconnected, but it's also pluralistic.
Yeah, and if you think about the use case applications that you're exposed to, you've developed these systems for a purpose. What are you most excited about?
Ooh, I mean, I'm certainly very excited about seeing the impact investing use case become a bit more tethered to reality. I think, if we want to focus on that application, it's important to understand that these are often wicked problems, and that naive measurements are not just wrong, often misleading, and they can lead to gamification. And in fact, they become absurd in the extent that you might spend a lot of money to achieve some goal, and even if you seem to have achieved it in the metrics, you haven't driven the real world outcome. And so the capacity for this family of technologies to sort of embrace complexity, embrace information from with more depth and breadth, and create more room for on the ground lived experience feedback, that actually will be a much more powerful sense making and sort of world changing apparatus than something that is so, I don't want to say centralized because it's maybe a buzzword here, but so degenerate might be the math term. Like, you're so focused on this one metric that gaming that metric is more important than driving the real outcome that metric was meant to capture. This is sometimes called good heart manipulability. And so, basically breaking that threshold and actually respecting that breadth and depth of information on the ground to create more close alignment with the desired outcome or the phenomena that you wish to drive, rather than merely optimizing for the metric used to proxy for that outcome. That's where I see this really making a turn for the better. And it's a lot of that's to be determined, right? We're not suggesting that we may wave a magic wand and this is fixed, but that gap, or the epistemic gap between the real phenomena outcome and the proxy measurement of the outcome, is a main reason why our existing institutions have failed to drive real change on things that matter. And so it is at least my sincere hope that the technology stack and social technology stack that's driving this current wave of tools, processes, institutions has the capacity to deal with that gap better, and thus actually serve us better in the face of wicked problems.
Yeah. So we only have a couple of minutes left. If we pull this all together and consider what might be a catalytic question or insight or something that people can do, having listened to the 15 minutes of conversation, what would you say is the take-home message that you would like to give people?
I think I would like to encourage people to take an active interest in and directly sort of contribute or get involved in things, not everything, like instead of trying to know a little bit about everything, maybe know a lot of bit about something, and then find a way to bring the sort of depth of your on the ground experience, or the knowledge that, human knowledge that you can create, and funnel that into a system. I think that the wisdom of the crowds notion has often been misused, because it implies that lots of shallow, naive thinking creates wisdom. But in reality, it's aggregation of the kind of signal that you can only get from a human. But you're not going to get that by being sort of shallow and naive. You're going to get that by being deeply engaged and participatory. So to get a feel for it, your best bet is to find one or two things that you're really passionate about and participate more deeply, so that your connection to the real world becomes a source of data for the system that is at least hopefully serving you and humans at large.
That's well said. So get deeply connected and participate. Thanks very much, and thanks to everyone for tuning in. So we're going to end that call. And Z, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.